They say hindsight is 20/20. But what no one tells you is how it feels to watch a slow-motion car crash that you predicted Dan be silenced before it even begins. I wasn't just some bitter employee or doomsday prophet. I was the one who saw the storm before the clouds even formed. And still, I was the one thrown overboard while the captain stayed. Smiling on a sinking ship, my name's Alex Morgan, 35 MBA from a mid-tier school. Never been flashy, never been one to play politics, but numbers. Numbers never lied to me. I was the lead analyst at Titan Core Investments, a rising star in a firm that had built its reputation on fast deals, risky bets, and a charismatic CEO who could charm gold out of gravel. Richard Langston. Richard was the kind of man people followed off cliffs. Charisma like fire, promises like gospel. When he spoke, the room listened. Hell, even I didn't, till I started seeing what lay beneath the gloss. I'd been with Titan Core for 6 years, climbed the ladder fast because I delivered, quietly, consistently. I wasn't in his inner circle, but Richard knew my name, nodded at me in meetings. I thought that counted for something. It started with a trend, a tiny pattern in our risk portfolio's assets, over-leveraged, debt structures too exposed. At first, I thought maybe I was overreacting. But the deeper I dug, the more I saw a collapse waiting to happen. Subprime commercial real estate plays, unhedged international bets, classic signs of a crash. And Richard, he was doubling down, talking expansion, aggressive growth. He called it. I called it lunacy. I spent weeks building a presentation, laid out the numbers, the correlations, the stress tests. I rehearsed it a dozen times before I knocked on his door. I wasn't trying to embarrass him. I just wanted him to see, to pause, to listen. He didn't. He sat back in his chair, barely glanced at the slides. Then he smirked, that infuriating polished smirk. Alex, he said, if I needed someone to scare me, I'd call my ex-wife. We're in the business of risk. You want safe. Join a credit union. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I thanked him for his time and left the office quietly. But the next morning I got the email. HR, immediate termination. Restructuring, they said. My ID was deactivated by noon. I remember walking out of that building with a box in my hands, staring up at the mirrored glass of the tower I helped build. I had given everything to that place, late nights, missed birthdays, ulcers, and loyalty. And they discarded me like I was contagious. I sat in my car that night for 2 hours. Didn't start the engine, didn't cry. I just stared at the glowing windows on the 27th floor, wondering how someone could be so blind, so cruel. That was the night I stopped trusting people who smiled too wide. That was the night I swore I'd make peace with being the warning no one listened to. Losing the job hurt, but it was the silence afterward that haunted me most. No goodbye from Richard. No acknowledgement from the people I'd mentored. Just a polite HR rep handing me a severance letter like I was an inconvenience. Had finally cleared off their schedule. The first few weeks were a fog. I stayed in my apartment half-heartedly scrolling job boards I didn't have the energy to apply to. My apartment was a cage, the walls echoing with everything I didn't say in that meeting. I kept replaying it, my tone, his smirk, that final sentence. Was I too aggressive? Did I come off arrogant? Maybe I should have softened the message. Maybe I should have said nothing at all. But every time I looked at the data on my old laptop, because yes, I kept a copy, I felt that burn in my chest. I knew I hadn't been wrong. Then the calls started. Nothing dramatic. Just old colleagues reaching out under the guise of small talk. Hey man, weird times at the office lately. Just checking in. I heard about the termination. Total BS. Richard's been acting weird since. I miss having someone who actually looked at the damn numbers. At first I thought it was pity, but the more we talked, the more I picked up on something darker. People were nervous. Projects were being shut down. Mid-level managers were being pushed out without explanation. Compliance teams were being reshuffled silently. I didn't say much during these conversations. I listened. And I wrote everything down. Then one night Jenna called. She had been our internal auditor, a no-nonsense woman with a gift for sniffing, touting consistencies. We'd worked on a few internal reviews together. She always respected the data. That's what made what she said stick. Alex, she whispered like she thought someone was listening. They're hiding something. I don't have proof yet, but the asset sheets from Q2 don't match what's filed. And get this, Rich, been moving funds offshore. Not illegal-et, but shady. Really shady. My stomach dropped. I asked her if she still had access. She didn't answer right away. Not for long. She finally said, they just revoked my admin credentials. Said it was an IT mistake, but they're closing ranks fast. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I pulled up the portfolio models I had archived before I left. Started comparing them to public filings and the press releases Titan Core had been sending out. At first glance, everything looked normal, to normal like it had been cleaned up. But then I noticed something. A pattern, small shifts in asset valuation that made no mathematical sense, a commercial development in Jakarta that somehow increased in value despite regional instability, a failing hedge fund quietly listed as strategic growth in their international branch, and worst of all, several short-term liabilities just vanished from the balance sheet. This wasn't just risky investing. This was fraud, or at least the kind of number twisting that usually precedes one. I was pacing my apartment at 3 a.m., heart racing like I'd had 5 cups of coffee. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was systemic. It was rot that went all the way down to the foundation. And the more I looked, the more obvious it became that I'd been fired, not because I was wrong, but because I was right too early. Richard hadn't just ignored my warning, he'd buried it. Maybe he thought I was a threat to his image, or maybe he truly believed he could outrun the collapse. Either way, I wasn't just collateral damage. I was silenced. The next morning, I received a strange message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, Alex. You're not at Titan Core anymore. Move on." No signature, no context. Just that dot. And suddenly, this wasn't just about job loss. It wasn't just about numbers. It was about a man who would do anything to protect the illusion he'd built, and I was now a liability to that illusion. But what they didn't realize was this. When you've already lost everything, fear loses its grip on you. I wasn't looking for revenge, I just wanted the truth. And now, I knew Richard wasn't just ignoring the crash. He was steering the company straight into it, and trying to take everyone down with him. The day I found the proof started like any other, quiet, gray, and filled with the usual hum of anxiety. But by sundown, I wasn't just the guy who'd been fired for raising a red flag. I was the guy holding a match to the truth, and Titan Core was soaked in gasoline. It all started with Jenna. After our late-night call, she went silent for 3 days. I assumed she'd been scared off, or worse, silenced. But then she messaged me on Signal, "Meet me tonight." No phones. We met in a parking garage downtown, 5 levels underground. Dramatic maybe, but it didn't feel like overkill when I saw the look on her face. Pale, tense, constantly checking her surroundings. She handed me a flash drive and said only 3 words. "You were right." Back in my apartment, I stared at the drive for a long time before plugging it into an old laptop I kept offline. I didn't know what I expected, maybe half a dozen spreadsheets or some half-baked audit trails. What I got was 4 gigabytes of chaos. Internal emails between Richard and a man named Morris Holt, some consultant with ties to an offshore firm in the Caymans. Red-flagged transactions rerouted through dummy corporations. Altered valuation reports. Meeting notes that included phrases like liability masking and pressure external valuation firms to reclassify assets. And then I found a tan internal memo labeled Project Iceberg. It was a deliberate strategy to inflate Titan Core's holdings, just long enough for Richard and a few senior partners to liquidate their shares and exit quietly, leaving mid-level staff and investors to deal with the implosion. Their version of a graceful escape. Everyone else, sacrificial pawns. My chest tightened with rage. I'd been loyal to that company, to Richard. I'd warned him, not out of ego, but because I believed in what we were building. And he'd not only fired me, fired others too. Anyone who got close. Anyone who asked the wrong questions. Jenna was next on that list. Maybe even higher now. But with this drive, we finally had something real. Something undeniable. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I spent the hours printing copies, encrypting backups, uploading secure archives to cloud drives I controlled under aliases. I made USB copies and mailed them to 3 different cities under fake names, old hacker tricks I never thought I'd use in real life. The next day, I made a list. A short one. People I trusted. People with leverage. I called Marcus, a former compliance officer at Titan Core who'd been ousted 6 months earlier under confidential circumstances. We weren't close, but we'd had drinks a few times. Enough for him to answer when I called. "You sound like a man on fire," he said when I told him I had proof I am. I replied, "And I need you to help me pour gasoline." He laughed, but only for a second. Then his tone turned serious. "Meet me tomorrow. We'll talk." I hung up feeling different, not safe. Not calm but focused. I was done mourning. Now I was moving pieces. Jenna helped her. From her end, she had access to old audit logs, shredded documents she'd secretly scanned, and employee messages flagged for deletion that she'd recovered from backups. She wasn't just brave, she was brilliant. We met in person now. Always, away from public areas, and talked strategy. Who could we trust? What outlet would take this seriously? Who in the regulatory world would move fast enough before Richard triggered his exit plan? We debated going to the press. But I knew that if we went to the media too soon, Richard would spin the narrative, frame us as disgruntled ex-employees, use his influence to bury us in lawsuits and smear campaigns. We had to go smarter, we needed to go legal. That's when I remembered Elaine Cho. She wasn't a friend, more like a memory. We'd crossed paths at an ethics and investment conference a year earlier. She was an investigator with the SEC, young but sharp, with a reputation for taking down white-collar schemes that most people were too scared to touch. I still had her card. When I called and said my name, there was a pause. Then she said, "You're the guy from Titan Core, right?" My heart skipped. "Yeah, and I have something you'll want to see." We met the next day in a bland federal building. I handed over one of the drives and watched her eyes widen as she clicked through. Realize what you're showing me is the kind of thing that gets people indicted, she said quietly. I know, I replied, and I'm ready. For the first time in weeks. I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt like I was swimming toward something. Toward justice. Toward truth. But make no mistake, I was still scared. I was still angry. Every moment of this process was a tightrope walk between fear and purpose. But now I wasn't just a man who'd been betrayed. I was a man with a plan. And Richard, he was still sitting in his glass office, sipping scotch, smiling for cameras, clueless that the fuse had already been lit beneath his empire. The morning of the showdown felt like the quiet before a storm. I woke up before the sun, standing at the window with a black cup of coffee that had long since gone cold in my hand. Downtown buzzed with its usual hum, horns, sirens, footsteps, but all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing, steady, controlled, because today wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. Elaine had done her part. Over the past 10 days, she quietly built the case, corroborating the data with files, validating the fraudulent transactions, and, most importantly, getting the federal green light. This wasn't some headline-grabbing PR stunt. This was a precision strike. We had just one shot to make it count. The FCC, DOJ, and a forensic audit team were coordinating a sweep, a simultaneous multi-site raid. Titancor's HQ, the private homes of 2 board members, and the offices of Holt Financial in the Caymans. Everything was timed down to the second, and I was going to be there not to gloat, not to watch it crumble, but to witness it fall. Jenna and I stood outside Titancor's lobby just after 9 a.m., dressed like any other suit-wearing professionals on the street. We weren't alone for long. Black SUVs pulled up one by one, unmarked, efficient. Men and women in dark jackets moved quickly, quietly. The kind of silence that only comes from certainty. Then I saw him. Richard. He stepped out of a town car, sunglasses on, grinning as he spoke to someone on the phone. He didn't notice the agents until they were in front of him, badges raised, voices firm. Richard Langston, by order of the Securities and Exchange Commission, you are under investigation for financial fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit securities violations. We have a warrant to search these premises and seize all relevant documents and devices. His smirk didn't falter at first, but then he saw me. I stepped forward, just enough for our eyes to lock through the glass, and in that moment, something changed in his expression. Confusion, then disbelief, then fury. Alex, he said, stunned. Yeah, I said quietly, my voice steady. Me. He lunged forward, shouting, you don't know what you've done. You think this changes anything? You're a nobody. One of the agents held him back. Sir, please calm down. But Richard wasn't calm, not anymore. Everything I built, you couldn't even carry my briefcase. You think they'll make you a hero for this? No, I said, walking away. But no, I wasn't the villain. Inside the building, chaos reigned. I watched from across the street as employees were ushered out. Servers were confiscated, and boardroom doors were kicked open. The glass fortress that once loomed over me now looked fragile, mortal. Just another tower destined to fall. An hour later, I stood in a conference room in a federal building with Elaine, Jenna, and 2 stern-faced prosecutors. They reviewed the final summary of what we'd uncovered. Over $240 million in fraudulently inflated assets, shell accounts spanning 5 countries, and internal emails proving Richard's full knowledge and orchestration. He wasn't just negligent, he was the architect of a lie built on arrogance and silence. And now the silence was broken. You did good, Elaine said quietly as she closed the file. You saved a lot of people from losing everything. I nodded, but the weight in my chest didn't lift right away. The justice was real, but so was the cost. I had lost my job, my peace, my name, and I still wasn't sure what came next. Later, that evening, the story broke. Every major news outlet ran it. Titancore empire crumbles amid fraud investigation. CEO Richard Langston in federal custody as SEC uncovers massive cover-up. Whistleblower ex-analyst triggers major financial scandal. My phone exploded. Messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Some congratulating me, others asking how I pulled it off. A few just said thank you, but none of them mattered as much as one message from my dad. Proud of you, son. The truth always wins, even when it costs you. I stared at that text for a long time. He was right. Richard's face was plastered across every screen that night, being led out in cuffs. That trademark smug grin finally gone. His empire, the one he laughed at me for questioning, was now a smoldering pile of paper trails and frozen assets, and me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt released, because this wasn't about winning. It was about not letting the lie stand. It was about proving that speaking up, even when it costs you everything, still matters. And when I finally laid down that night after weeks of planning, fear, doubt, and fire, I slept. For the first time in a long, long time, I slept. The fallout came fast. Richard Langston was formally indicted on multiple counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy within a week. His assets were frozen, his travel restricted, and that smug, media-polished image of his shattered. He tried to hold a press conference from his lawyer's office, claiming innocence, painting himself as the victim of a corporate witch hunt, but the evidence was overwhelming. There was no spin that could salvage his legacy. The board resigned in disgrace. 2 senior executives flipped almost immediately, cutting deals with prosecutors to reduce their sentences. Titancore stock tanked within hours of the raid, wiping out billions in market value. Investors were furious. Class action lawsuits followed like wolves. Offices emptied. Emails bounced back. The empire had crumbled just like I said it would. The headlines kept coming for weeks. It felt surreal reading my own name in articles that once worshipped Richard. Former analyst turned whistleblower. They called me. A few reporters even offered me book deals. I turned them down. I wasn't chasing fame, I was chasing justice. And I got it. Still, the emotions didn't cleanly resolve. I thought I'd feel triumphant, that I'd watch the collapse with a glass of whiskey in hand, some righteous smirk on my face, but that never came. Instead, I felt something quieter, heavier. I thought about the people who lost jobs they didn't deserve to lose, the younger analysts who believed in Titancore the way I once did, the interns who were just trying to get a foot in the door. I thought about the meetings I'd once sat in, how many of us stayed quiet, because we thought someone else would speak up first. And then I thought about the moment Richard fired me, that condescending tone, that smug dismissal. He was right about one thing. I wasn't a name. I wasn't someone important. But now, neither was he. One night, Jenna and I grabbed drinks, our first time relaxing since this all began. She looked tired, but there was peace behind her eyes. We sat at the bar in silence for a while, watching city lights shimmer off rain-soaked streets. "You think it was worth it?" she finally asked. I thought for a second, then nodded. "Yeah," said. "It cost us everything. But it saved the truth." She clinked her glass against mine and smiled. We weren't heroes. We weren't celebrated. There was no parade, no standing ovation. But the lie was dead. The monster was exposed. And we were still standing. That was enough for now. It's strange how quiet life becomes after the storm passes. The whirlwind of subpoenas, interviews, and headlines faded in the rear view faster than I expected. One day I was waking up to my name in every major paper, and the next, nothing. The world moved on. Titancore was old news. Richard's trial date was set, and the headlines shifted to the next scandal. But I didn't need the world to remember. I just needed to move forward. After everything, I took time off. Real time. No job hunting, no resume building, no obsessing over finance reports or market trends. I disappeared from the chaos and spent 3 months in a quiet cabin upstate. I hiked. I read. I sat on the porch with coffee and listened to the wind without thinking about returns on investment or the next quarterly projection. At first, it felt unnatural, like I was cheating time. But slowly I started to breathe deeper, sleep longer, smile more. And one morning, without even planning to, I opened my laptop and started writing. Not a report, not an analysis, just thoughts. What I'd seen, what I'd learned, not just about Richard or Titancore, but about people, about fear, about courage. I wrote for hours. That journal turned into essays. Those essays turned into conversations. I shared pieces with a few friends, one of whom passed it along to a business ethics professor at NIU. She invited me to speak at a seminar, standing in front of that small lecture hall, telling a room full of finance students what really goes on behind the curtain. It felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I didn't even know I'd lost after the talk. A student came up and said, "Thanks for telling the truth. We don't hear this side enough." That hit me. I wasn't just a former analyst anymore. I was a storyteller, a warning, a voice reminding people that behind every number is a human being. Behind every betrayal is someone who knew and stayed quiet. Not me. Not anymore. Eventually I took a job. Not with a hedge fund, not with a Fortune 500. I joined a small firm that focuses on ethical investing, real transparency, real responsibility. It's quieter, pretty paced, but it's honest. And I go home every day knowing I'm not part of another machine built on silence. Jenna started her own forensic accounting firm. We still meet for coffee once a month, our unofficial no BS support group. She's sharper than ever, and stronger. We both are. Looking back, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed quiet, if I'd just accepted the paycheck and kept my head down. I'd probably still have that corner office, maybe even a promotion, but I'd have to look in the mirror every morning and see a coward. Now I see a survivor. Not of a crash, but of a choice to speak up when it mattered. To lose everything and still walk forward. To rise. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I believed the truth was worth the fall. People think betrayal is loud, that it comes in slamming doors or shouted arguments or some dramatic climax with tears and finger pointing. But the truth, it's quiet. It happens in the pauses, in the silences between meetings, in the emails that never get answered, in the sudden chill in a room where you once felt valued. What happened to me wasn't just about one man's ego or one company's greed. It was about what we allow to grow in the shadows when we're too scared to speak. It was about the price of silence and the cost of integrity. I lost a job. I lost friends I thought were loyal. I lost my sense of safety. in an industry I once trusted. But in losing all that, I gained something far more valuable. Clarity. I learned that true strength isn't found in holding power. It's in holding your ground when it shakes beneath you. That resilience doesn't mean being unbreakable. It means choosing to rebuild, even after the worst happens. And justice, it's not always swift. It's not always clean. But when it arrives, it clears the rot from the foundation. Most of all, I learned that being right doesn't always make you the hero. Sometimes it makes you the target. But that doesn't mean you stop telling the truth. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Your voice matters, especially when the room tries to mute it. Your gut matters, especially when the data confirms it. And your courage, it might cost you everything. But it might also save someone else from losing more. Because sometimes doing the right thing won't make you rich. It won't make you famous. It might not even make you safe, but it will make you free. And at the end of the day, I'd rather walk away with nothing but my name than stay in comfort built on a lie. So ask yourself, what would you risk to protect the truth?